Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome production designer Neal Callow, who joins us to talk about their work on the franchise. Neal will talk us through what it was like designing for a TV series about a film franchise and the creative decisions that he made. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Neal. Hi Neal, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to go straight off the bat with this. I've actually worked with you before. We worked together on my first job on Spectre.
Okay. And what were you doing on Spectre? Remind me.
I was working in payroll with the late Steve Barry.
Oh, yeah, good old Steve. Yeah, I remember him well. Okay, well, there we go. So
So,
the small
so
world.
I know
Okay.
it's always kind of nice to then sort of connect back to people and
Yeah.
sort of jump back 10 years basically, which is mental.
Yeah, it's crazy. In fact, my son, who was born just before we started Spectre, just had his 11th birthday over the weekend.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that shows you how long ago that was. Feels like yesterday sometimes.
Yeah, like I remember sort of scanning everybody's payroll and being like, wow, this is show business. This is it's like they
Yeah.
lied.
Yeah, a monumental movie, and it was kind of all over the place as well, wasn't it? Because we were in Austria and Morocco, and various other spots, and yeah, yeah, it was an epic undertaking, and I think it's a great film. I watched it again recently, and really enjoyed it. It was good fun.
I think the opening is probably the best cold opening of a Bond, potentially, I
Yeah,
reckon.
yeah,
That whole Mexico sequence
yeah,
because
that
it's
was
just
yeah,
so vast and so cool. But we're
yeah.
not here to talk. We're not here to reminisce about the past, but we're here to talk about your latest project, the franchise, which is streaming on HBO and Sky. How did the project come about for you, and what made you want to take it on?
Well, I've worked before. Obviously, we've just been talking about Spectre. So I've worked I think I've done 3 or 4 projects with Sam Mendes. And obviously, this was his kind of like brainchild, him and Armando Iannucci, who sort of came up with this idea for this show. I think it was quite a long time ago, actually, having, heard the stories and read some of the kind of like history of this project. That they were having lunch or something, and they came up with this idea while talking about their own experiences of making franchise movies, TV shows, whatever it might be. And of course, it's one of those things, as I'm sure you will know yourself, that during the production of some of these big studio movies, franchise movies, whatever, we're often saying to each other as crew, someone should be making a movie of this because it's absolutely absurd what we're being asked to do or what we're trying to achieve with the kind of limited time and resources we've got available to us. And, of course, all the kind of like interpersonal dynamics that happen on these productions, egos obviously is a big part of it. So, we'd been as a kind of like collective crew, we've been talking about this possibility for years. So it made total sense when we heard that Sam and Armando were going to kind of undertake the production of this show. And of course, everyone who we contacted, including myself, obviously, everyone wanted to work on it, and they just thought, "Oh, this is so great because we can all tap into our own direct experience of some of this stuff." And we know the kind of like from a kind of production design standpoint, we know the visual language of what this stuff looks like because we've been living it every day for the last 20 years or whatever. So it's a really fun kind of a fun and familiar visual tapestry to kind of tap into, and we can all pull from our direct personal experiences. So it was really attractive job, great team involved. I know a lot of the people at Neal Street. I didn't know many people at HBO, but they were fantastic as well, really supportive and fun team to work with. So yeah, it was great, and a great studios at Leavesden as well.
When it comes to sort of like the research part, 'cause you said you've lived it for so many years, is it a case that you just look out the window and look at the trailers, and then also when people think of sound stages, it's just big warehouses, so you think, oh, okay, this is going to be quite easy to draw from. Do you do research by looking at certain films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit or like The Player or even something like Entourage, where it kind of incorporates that world into the
Yeah,
narrative?
I think the answer to that is not exactly actually. Because what we really wanted to do with this was make it fit, in order for the comedy to kind of like be believable and not be too much of a kind of pastiche of itself. We wanted the surroundings or the environments in which these scenes take place to feel absolutely real and genuine and exactly like they would be. So there wasn't any kind of like heightening of the reality or kind of, stylization, if you like, of the environments they take place in. So I'm talking there more about the kind of like the set dressing of the stages that isn't the sets themselves, but more the kind of, where the sound guy sits and where the video operator sits and the DIT guys and all the easy ups, hair and makeup and the guys who are doing their checks. So we didn't look at stuff that had been stylized like Roger Rabbit or Entourage or something like that. We looked more at what it actually looks like when you're making, whatever, a James Bond film or a Marvel film or, any kind of big studio movie. And kind of one of the things about it was, Sam and John Brown, who's the writer and showrunner of this, they were very keen to kind of like make it clear that the people who are working on this have been bedded in, into this job for a long time, so it's not, they haven't just kind of arrived and set up 20 minutes and started shooting. This is something they've been on the same stage for 6 weeks, or they've been in the studio environment for 6 weeks. So a lot of the kind of like personal details and the kind of like familiar sort of home comfort that you find on people's magliners and on people's like continuity tables. We wanted to have that level of detail that you get when people have been sitting on the same stage for, a long period of time. So we actually looked more at, what it was actually like, and we wanted to get that feeling across through all the little details so that the kind of like scenarios that obviously are comedic in this, but the scenarios that are happening are believable. We didn't want to kind of like try and turn the set into the comedy, because then it sort of subtracts from the actual reality of what is happening, which is kind of what happens, on a lot of these jobs. So if you look at it, you'll see that we tried to kind of, you've got all the little bits of colored camera tape stuck to things and the kind of messy wires underneath people's tables and the half drunk coffees and post-it notes stuck here and there, and whatever, storyboards stuck on the wall with lots of post-its and Sharpie marks on them and all of that stuff. So we tried to get that real kind of deep sense of detail and kind of lived inness on the sets.
And would you say that like when you're creating that sort of lived-in environment, and you've gone for those little touches like the camera tape, the coffee cups, I think sometimes probably even the bottles as well, that
Mm.
sometimes you might water bottles around. Is there sort of like you start thinking about going more into detail of stuff that you might have seen as well? So trying to think of like something that somebody would have on a mag liner, like I guess it'd be like a stuffed animal or something that goes with them on
100%.
every.
100%. And everyone, what was so great about this was that all the people, again, sort of just to go back to your first question, all the people who worked as part of the team, the design team on this, all of those people are really familiar with this as well. And they've spent, many a year on film sets. Usually what we're doing is, in my personal department in the art department, we're trying to clear this stuff out of the way of the camera so we're not looking at it on the set accidentally. But we've spent so much time on film sets that it's such a familiar kind of language to us to see all that stuff. So all of the set decorating team, the props team, we had a load of reference photos that we'd used or we'd taken on our own jobs in the past or on jobs that were currently happening. And we stuck them all on big mood boards and stuff. So people kind of got the flavor of what we were trying to do. And then they just went out and dressed it as if it was a real film set. I mean, it was kind of confusing because we had we had a fake film crew dressed onto the set around the set itself. So we had like fake continuity, fake directors, monitors, fake whatever producers tent, and all this stuff. But then we also had the real layer behind that, which was our franchise camera team. So and all of those those people. So we had an actor playing a grip and an actor playing a camera operator, and then we had a real grip and a real camera operator kind of filming them doing what they normally do during their day's work. So there was a kind of another kind of meta layer behind the layer that we were trying to put. But what was great about that was that all the people who know how these things should be put together and look. So for example, me personally, I would never know how to rig up kind of like a video feed from the A camera into the director's into the director's tent or whatever. But of course we had a real video operator there who would advise our set decorating team on how that should look and what plugs into where, and what bits of tape you have on the end of certain cables to color code things to this and that and the other. So all of the people who were working with us were also helping us make the environment look as genuine as possible, and that was great for everyone. And again, it's like everyone kind of enjoyed that process because it was kind of a bit of self-reflection in a way.
I could just picture like a grip seeing someone, the actor trying to be the grip and be like, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. You've done that completely wrong. You've done it in the wrong order, or you've put the dolly on incorrectly. And it's quite funny as well having that extra level of meta, knowing that you have somebody watching somebody else do what they would do every day.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, but I hope that it will come across in the show that it just looks real in the background. That's kind of exactly what we wanted it to achieve in the end. And you often see these kind of slightly cliched depictions or interpretations of what it is like to be a film studio, and there's whatever the classic two guys carrying a ladder out of the stage wearing brown coats, or a sheet of glass, or part of a giraffe's head or something, or wheeling one big light around. But actually it's much more chaotic than that. It's like organized chaos, and there's a real depth of detail. There's so much stuff everywhere that has to be organized, and we wanted to try and create that depth in the background of the composition that we were looking at. We wanted to show how much stuff there was all the time. And if you're if you're trying to kind of like depict a franchise superhero style movie, I mean, those films, they've got enormous budgets and they have so much stuff with them. They've got all different camera rigs, they've got all, the grips have got all different kinds of cranes and jib arms, dollies, this, that, and the other, miles of track, you name it, they've got it, and it's on the stage usually, or coming off the back of a truck onto the stage. So we needed to kind of be able to get that level of, or that quantity of stuff in order for it to feel genuine. And I think that was something that well, at least our set deck and props team did a really good job of pulling all that stuff together.
again, it's because I work in transport, so I know how much people have, especially when you've got your tech trucks and all that jazz or collections. And yeah, it's quite mental, like the just how much equipment is needed just for like one day of shoot, or if they need it for a specific shot, or if they're doing stunts, it's like, yeah, it's mental.
Yeah. And then
Like,
and then you see you sort of you start realizing why films cost so much money, because you've got to have all of this equipment available in order to facilitate the shoots. I mean, obviously you've got to be as organized as possible, but you can't, the schedule doesn't wait for things. You either have the kit equipment to get the shot that you plan to get, or you don't, on the day, and then the time passes and you don't get the opportunity again to do it. So you've got to have all this kind of kit available to you if you've got the expectation of making that kind of scale of studio movie.
and it's also, I think, what I've sort of realized as well is when you're on places like the back lot, where that's when it's like you probably see the most kit because you're in an open area, and then they build it all up with whatever they have on the stage, not on the stage, on the back lot, and then they need to cover it with containers. It's like it's crazy. I think even like they use these inflatable. I can't remember what they're called now, but they're like big inflatable green screens that they
Yeah,
stack
yeah.
above. Yes, and it's like even that being incorporated and seeing that, thinking like I don't know how long how long it took for people to put stuff like that up and prep for people to come in and shoot.
Well,
Um,
we have one of our episodes which takes place on the back lot actually at night, and it's again, it's interesting because we, to try and achieve the look that we were doing, we needed to get some like height into it, because whenever you see a kind of like night shoot out on a studio back lot, what sort of the first thing that you'd notice is giant cranes with lights hanging off them. That's always that's always the thing that sort of looks the most alien from the outside. You're like, what is going on over there? These enormous cranes with these giant light boxes dangling underneath them. It's kind of a beautiful, spectacular sight. So we really wanted to kind of bring that aesthetic into it as well. Again, to try and give that genuine look.
And I guess that's another sort of potential detail that you need to add in, especially with night shoots. You're right, seeing those big cranes above, and just thinking like, yeah, what is going on? Especially with lights and how they hang them, and then also the flags that they need to put in, and even
Yeah,
when you have the set as well and how they've built that up, it
yeah,
is incredible to see, and it's also incredible to think that people built this in 6 weeks, 2 months sort of time.
yeah, or even quicker in our case.
Yeah, no, which is quite scary. But then with the show itself, because going through my research, this was your first time as production designer, which is quite a big step up in general when you're moving up in the industry and going to head of department. How did that make you feel, and how did you sort of deal with the pressure of working on the show?
Well, first of all, it's a great privilege to be asked to do that job because it was as I said before, really fun subject matter. It's comedy and it's a, great team of directors and producers and writers. And, the scripts that John and his team wrote were really just brilliant. So I was, very privileged and grateful to be offered the opportunity to do it. How did I deal with it? I mean, honestly, it was just having a really good team of people around me. So I've got some people that I've worked with for many years in different capacities who kind of came on board to join this project, and all of them knocked it out of the park. So it was it was really fun to do it. And as I said, HBO and Neil Street very supportive, and they we didn't have a massive budget to do the franchise, but we had to call in a lot of favors from a lot of the people that we knew around the industry, including kind of, our lighting suppliers and special effects teams and, people like that who could supply big chunks of set dressing for us at a kind of reduced price. In terms of the actual kind of production design of the show, I mean, again, great fun, because we were making this fictional film called Tecto. I mean, that's kind of like at the heart of the story is that this whole TV show takes place on the set of this fictional film called Tecto, which is like it's a superhero franchise movie, one of a few different superhero franchise movies that are getting made at the same studios by this fictional studio called Maximum Studios, who are kind of like a Marvel slash DC adjacent but different type film studio. So what John and Sam and Armando and the guys wanted us to do was, in fact, like one of the first things we had to do was think about what this film Tecto is going to be. So we would get a synopsis from the writers, and then we would design the film of Tecto in the way that we would design the film if we were going to make Tecto as a movie. So we did all the concept art, did all the research, what are these characters like? Where does this all take place? What the planet surfaces look like? Where these scenes are going to take place in the real movie of Tecto. So we did all of that stuff, and that for us became the kind of design foundation of the movie of Tecto, and that established the kind of style it was because it's not Marvel and it's not DC. It's kind of another trajectory out of that same genre, I guess. So anyway, we came up with a load of ideas of what the places might look like, did the concept art, and then from there extrapolated what would actually be the set, because we've worked on these films ourselves, so we know, right, if you're going to achieve this piece of concept art, let's say you wanted to achieve this composition, this much of it would be a hard physical film set. We would have this much set extension, LED screen, green screen, whatever it might be, and the details would all look like this. So we sort of did it in a way that we would do it had we been actually designing the film. Obviously, we had to find ingenious ways of making it way cheaper than we would have been able to do had it been a real studio movie. But again, lots of experience, a very experienced construction team, and very, very experienced set deck and props guys. So we all kind of pulled together to achieve a look that was believable, but on a television budget.
And do you find that even though you're calling a lot of favors, that it could be that you found that people were quite helpful as well, knowing that you've got things going on, they kind of get an idea of what you want to do as well.
People are always helpful in the film industry if they can be, if it's it's a very collaborative environment to work in, and people tend to enjoy their work. So this particular project, of course, just had an extra bit of kind of intrigue for everybody because it was kind of, like I said, sort of self-reflection a little bit. And as soon as you told anyone about kind of what the scenario was, they're, oh, that happened to us last year, or da 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 da. So of course, everyone's kind of interest is piqued, and everyone wants to help, And I think that's what it's one of the great things about the business in general, really, is that people kind of love the job, and really want to do the best job they can of things, and help as much as possible. Obviously, there's always money and schedule and blah blah blah, blah involved, but yeah, lots of people were really really helpful to us, and I know that John spent a long time kind of interviewing a lot of practicing HODs, ADs, costume designers, whatever it was, to kind of get some of these ideas into the scripts in the first place. And those guys were all very helpful as far as I hear as well. But yeah, it was a pleasure to kind of put it together in the end.
Do you find as well, I guess, with so many different stories, there's probably, you could probably, well, everybody could probably write a book about their experiences. But I wonder what it must be like to cut down some of those stories, knowing that you could have absolute gold just there on the paper.
I mean, that's the sort of the great fun that John and all of his team were having writing this stuff. A lot of it was kind of, I mean, I'm speaking on his behalf here a little bit, but I guess a lot of it would be an editorial job because there's so many stories. It's like, well, what do you include out of this absolute kind of like encyclopedic amount of comedy information that you're getting, and how do you kind of blend one situation with another situation to make it applicable to the characters in the franchise. I hope that the show goes to more seasons, because like you say, there's such a wealth and depth of all these stories from everyone involved. Everyone you talk to has got a whole set of their own stories, so there's no shortage of ideas there, to be sort of like depicted on screen. So yeah, I hope it will go on to many more series or seasons, they say these days.
Yeah, fingers crossed that it will be the case. But again, I think in other ways, like your people are so morbidly interested in like behind the scenes of how things are done, or even like there's certain books as well about how certain films might tank studios, and they always are like a really good read, but then also they are sort of like, I can't believe this is something that happens in the business all the time. Or
Yeah.
certain even like the butterfly effect of like a certain small decision could completely tank something.
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of it as well, and that's the crazy kind of the crazy world of sort of big studio filmmaking. It is a crazy ride, and there are all these kind of personalities and decision makers involved, some of which you never even meet. But the effects of a kind of conversation that might have happened on the other side of the world can suddenly affect your day's shooting, in Watford or wherever it might be. And the guys have done a great job of kind of including that kind of relationship in this show as well.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Imagine that, like, again, having a decision in another continent can completely ruin your next day, or even change your next day about what you're prepping. But with the franchises, we know it's a TV show, but as you're one of the sort of ever-present HODs, there is a door of sort of revolving directors and DOPs. As someone who's always a constant, how is it working with people who kind of jump in and out of different episodes? Or is it just a case of following what the showrunner has in mind?
Yeah, at the end of the day, John and Sam were the sort of like the final creative, decision makers and people who approved what was happening. We had some great sort of DPs and directors and ADs who did the blocks of episodes. But like you say, we as a design department, we were consistent throughout the whole thing. It was fine actually. It was, to be honest, it was an education for us because I personally had never done like block scheduled television before. So I think it was all about, really it's about being as organized with your communication as you can possibly be. So it's like, right, let's, as soon as we have something approved by John or Sam, let's show it and communicate it as quickly as possible as we can to the directors and ADs and cinematographers who are involved in that particular block, so that they have time to, add their own input in, or just think about the choreography that they want to put together to make this stuff work, because that has a knock-on effect back to us. If they say, well, actually, I think it would be better if such and such came in from this direction, or we had more people over there, or what in the background, whatever it might be. So we've got so many great sort of digital tools available to us these days. It is quite straightforward to present what's happening in a sort of comprehensive and clear way to people who aren't yet on the job. Zoom and email obviously, and all of that stuff. So it is relatively easy to kind of like illustrate that stuff in advance, and that was one of our main jobs, was to kind of try and put it all together in an easy, digestible, and understandable form from a kind of design point of view, and get those guys kind of understanding it as early as possible, because that would then help us further down the line.
I think sometimes with block shooting it's always a bit of a shock with people to get your head around because sometimes it would be each person is like each director and DOP sort of unit working together, and then there's always a small crossover with the pre-production side as well. And it always feels like you're trying to play catch up in a way to what's happening, what's going on, to what's going to happen, to what has also happened as well. I always find that's like slightly, you get slightly disorientated with it because you're like, which one are we talking about now? What's going on with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our point of view, what was great was that we had a. It was actually even before the pilot, which was before the strikes. So we had a break for when the writers and the actors strikes happened. But before we did the pilot, we spent 6 weeks or whatever it was, basically coming up with the design foundation of what this was going to look like, and then talking that through with Sam and John, and going into the details of all the kind of the way they would like the sets to be dressed, or the kind of style of the film that we're supposed to be making, the costume and all of that stuff. So by the time we actually came to start, on sort of hard prep, if you like, for the pilot, we sort of knew the building blocks of what this was going to be and what it was going to look like, and we sort of knew that we all understood that. So then when it came to the subsequent episodes, we sort of had the aesthetic already. We sort of knew vaguely what the look was going to be, and then it was just applying that look onto whatever the latest set was. And of course, like in all productions of everything, ideas change, new ideas come in, old ideas are thrown out. But as long as you've got a kind of like collaborative understanding of what it is that makes the kind of like design solid underneath this stuff, then you can always refer it back to that, to have that foundation underneath. So I think having had that like early kind of pre-prep period to organize that was extremely efficient and beneficial later on.
And did you find that as even though there were strikes going on and there was a pause, did you find that having that little bit extra time helped you to sort of, get all the moving parts into sort of one place?
No, not really, actually. I think it was would have been we would have been fine to carry on almost off the back of the pilot. It didn't help or hinder us in the end. I mean, it was slightly annoying for loads of people because they were out of work, over that period. But in terms of the kind of like practicalities of the production, it didn't help or hinder us really. I mean, it probably was more of a hindrance than a help to production, because you'd have to off hire a load of stuff and then rehire it again, including stages and offices and stuff like that. But I mean, that was across the board for anyone who was working in the industry at the time.
And Well, I guess again, if I would hate to be in production around then to be saying you need to off hire it, but then yeah, we'll be back when everybody's back again. Um, there'll probably be very uncomfortable conversations to have, but hey ho, that's such as life. With the show itself as well, when it came to some of like the design point of view, because you've got stage space and you kind of have to use that stage space in a way. Did you, when you're designing, is that something you need to consider as how the space is going to be used? Because you're kind of turning a stage into your film, but then also because it's not a big budget film or show, how do you go about using that space to utilize it in your design?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that was like absolutely key to us was like, maximizing the kind of assets that we had, making the most of the money that we had available to us, and the space and all of that stuff. In a way, it was a slightly different kind of production design job because you're designing sets on a stage, which you don't often go into. So a lot of the time you're looking at the sets from the point of view of the director's monitor or the sound guy or the AD standing by the door. So if you go and look at a lot of these sets on these proper movies, they're actually often fully kind of enclosed with big floating doors. So what you actually see from outside the set is scaffolding and the back of a load of timber flattage. But on this show, we wanted to try and open up the sets a little bit more like theatre sets in a way, but they still had to look like movie sets. But you had to be able to see them in the background of the action, which was going to be all about the crew, not the actual making of the movie. So yeah, so we sort of we designed the sets to fit on the stage to be as kind of like as visible as possible from as many angles as possible within that stage space, but also allowing as much view of the kit back from the set towards the stage door. How can we make the best arrangement of all this kit that we've got, the lighting racks and the easy ups and the nurse's tent and the coffee station and all that, whatever it was. So that was all very thoroughly planned out. So we sort of drew absolutely everything, even the kind of like cable drums and bins and coffee cups, pretty much. We like drew the whole lot, so that we could plan it all out. So we could, because that allowed us to then create little animatic walkthroughs of these sets to help the directors and the writers kind of choreograph what was going to happen and where it was going to happen.
And then when you do have those sort of animatics, is that something just so that other departments can see where they can probably set up their lighting, or if the director knows how to do a walkthrough of how things will
Yeah, it's
look?
just, I mean, for me, they're a really good way, or that, animatics or just like 3D sort of illustrations are a really good way of just communicating to everyone else what it is that we're proposing to do. And then, what's really great about that process for me is that then everyone can say, oh, hang on a minute. Well, we need to get our camera crane in there. And, it's got to be at least 9 foot clearance between this and that. And, whatever it is, or we've got to put a lighting rig up there. So we can't put that underneath until later, whatever it might be. We draw this stuff in order to have those conversations so that we can say, right, this is what we're going to do, unless anyone else wants to chip in and say we should do it in a different way or allow more space for lighting over there, whatever it is. And then we can take that back and then we can redraw the plans and then we can get on with it. And for me, that's a really efficient way of working. And it's just really about kind of, inclusive communication and collaboration with all the other departments, which really is what this show is kind of all about, trying to get that right.
And then do you find as well when you do have something like that, and do you ever have that sort of moments where well, we haven't considered something like this, or you might need to then go back to the drawing board and make things a little bit wider so they can fit a crane in,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
example?
that's what it's for. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've been doing this a long time and I spent a long time as a kind of standby art director, which is the job of being the kind of art department representative on the shooting crew. So I have seen a lot of these situations kind of unfold in my day-to-day job in the past. So I'm quite experienced. I know quite a lot of what needs to happen and why and when and who's going to have to approve certain things, in terms of lighting or grip stuff or stunts or whatever it is. And so, I guess I I know who to ask, if you like, or I know what sort of stuff to expect, or I can take an educated guess at it anyway. But it's always better to get those kind of conversations happening as early as possible, so that you don't have to be reactive on the day. It's like, oh no, now we've got to do it. Now we've got to take all this down because such and such. If you can have that conversation, a month prior, then you can iron out so many of those problems, which of course leads to cost savings later on.
Oh, okay. Again, it's interesting to hear the sort of different ways that you need to consider your sets for getting people in as well. And I don't know, it always feels like you need to be about like 5 steps ahead just before you can really just put like the final paintbrush on your set.
Yeah, I guess that's I mean that's the whole of filmmaking, really, isn't it? It's trying to be as organized as possible, knowing, as we all do, that nothing quite goes exactly as planned ever.
No, and sometimes, unfortunately, people do say fix it in post, and you're like, oof, probably best to fix it now.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah, that's what we try and do.
What was the hardest set to design?
The hardest one to design, I would say it's probably the one from the pilots. And the reason that it was that one is just because that was the first one. And that was us kind of like establishing our style and, what the finishes were, what the kind of like flavor of Maximum Studios production looked like, you know. So I think that was that was the toughest one, I think. But it wasn't particularly tough. It was just it was the one that took the longest in terms of the kind of consideration of the elements that went into it, because that was the one that was going to set the sort of style for the rest of the season, and hopefully seasons beyond that as well.
And do you think it's just more, you say it's not tough, but it's more just the sort of taking that extra bit of time to establish what you're creating?
Yeah, I think
So,
it was the first physical manifestation of what a Maximum Studios product or film set was going to look like. That we sort of, in a way, it was the kind of test set for the season. So it was like, how's it going to work? How's it going to react to the lighting? What's the level of kind of like fantasy, if you like? How far are we going to push certain elements of it? All of those things that were, they were going to be a kind of a benchmark, a physical benchmark from which everything else had to, unify to later on and feel like part of the same franchise and the same world. So yeah, it was just more kind of R&D, I guess, and a bit more sort of thorough experimentation before we actually put it up.
okay. I guess again, it's one of those where as he's doing your R&D, that's probably something that I can imagine it's quite fun as well, knowing that
Oh, it's great fun.
if we're gonna do this, we can add this, or maybe we can change this.
Mm.
I always find that's probably the most interesting part of the job is the R&D, because then I feel like you can let your imagination run wild, but then you have to sort of rein it in a bit when certain things work or don't work.
Yeah, and of course, the kind of like the sort of concept design of all of this stuff is really great fun, and doing all the research and looking at all old comics and all of that stuff. That's a really fun part of it. But I also personally, I absolutely just love the construction, part of the job. I've always loved, building stuff and seeing stuff get built. So that's a really fun part of it as well for me. I sort of like both sides of that equally, really.
What about a case when your sets are being built? Obviously, you'll walk around to see what this progress is like. But when you go from like day to day or week to week, do you go to that sort of when you look at it and you think, wow, like this is really coming along perfectly. This is exactly how I would have imagined it in my head to now being put down in timber.
Yeah, I mean that's a great fun part of the job as well, is seeing something that you've drawn on the back of a fag packet and then eventually sort of turning into a digital 3D model or whatever, and then seeing it built, full size in a soundstage. I mean, that's obviously one of the best things about the job that we do in the art department, or construction, or whatever set deck. All of us kind of feel the same way about that. Yeah, no, it's great fun, and it doesn't always. It's not always right. In fact, it's rarely exactly what you think it's going to be. And again, that's all part of the fun as well, because you sort of tweak things. Provided you've got enough time and you're not completely on the back foot in terms of the schedule. You can tweak it when you get down there, and again, everyone else chips in, and the lighting guys will go, oh, I've got a great idea. We could maybe put a light behind here if we could have a little bit more setup or whatever it is. All of that stuff is really fun as well. And it kind of develops throughout the course of its construction, a lot of the times. And certainly for one of the episodes in one of the episodes takes place in a kind of a cave set. And that was one that we knew what the kind of shape and the volume of the cave was going to be and the kind of finish and the kind of general flavor of it. But then as it started getting built, then lots of our kind of like lighting team were coming up with great ideas about certain ways of lighting it, which then affected the set construction, if you like. But of course, because we're all there all the time, we can go and have a conversation in the morning and everyone can chip in with their ideas. And, oh, I know how we could do that. We could do X, Y, and Z. And we had a great construction manager, Adam Shepherdley, who was kind of, really sort of creative with things like that as well. Brilliant.
Again, as you said, the whole collaboration of it all and that idea of working on something that you're all familiar with can also spark people's imaginations as well and adding their own flavor, even if they are a completely different department.
100%. Yeah. And that's the way it has to be. Yeah.
For my penultimate question, what was your favorite set to design?
It probably was the first one, actually, again, because it was like it was the one that took the longest in terms of the consideration and all of the stuff we just talked about in the last question. But also it because of that, it was also when it worked, it was kind of one of the most satisfying to see it and think, wow, that actually, really came together in the end. And it was fun. And again, that's kind of it's a kind of cross between a theatre set and a film set in that it looks just like a film set would, but it's been designed so you can see it from all different angles from the crew's point of view from around the stage.
And sorry, I just something that you mentioned as well about like the theatre set compared to like a film set. With that, do you feel that with comparing it to a theatre set to what a real film set would look like, how would you go about with that design point? Is that more of a case of sort of planning where how each person would look from each end, so then you can kind of get a different point of view for each crew member? Or do you have to plan it in a certain way that it's more for like the audience to see, look in?
I mean, I suppose the reason that I'm sort of relating it to theatre sets is more that it's open, it's got open fronted and it's facing the kind of the audience, who in this case are not only the fictional film crew, but also our camera crews who are looking sort of into it. It's really about having something which is visible from around the rest of the stage. Whereas a lot of times with film sets, like I said earlier, I mean, they're pretty much completely enclosed. So you have to actually get right inside the film set before you can actually see it. And in this case, because we wanted to see all our, video village and video ops and caterers and all of that stuff, and we wanted to see the set at the same time, that sort of design theory came along relatively quickly.
I was more curious about that because you're like as audience members, you do see a difference between theatre set and film set, but then also the theatre set is always how they utilize the space or how they use the space for the story and so on and so forth. And it's always quite amazing to see visually as well. And then seeing on something like this would be quite exciting as well because you get such a different perspective as an audience member as well. And then for my final question, you have worked on a number of franchise films. So you've worked on Bond, DC, some Marvel stuff. If there was a dream job that came up that was in a franchise film, what would it be?
Sorry, say that again. If there was a dream job that came up that was or wasn't
That
a franchise.
was, that was.
Well, that's a good question. Well, I think honestly, doing James Bond that was always my, kind of ambition to get onto a James Bond film, which I was lucky enough to do. I would love to do another James Bond film, if I'm honest. That's great. I mean, I worked on Captain America, the first Captain America, back in 2009, I think that was, and I really enjoyed doing that because it was a period film as well, so it had that sort of element going for it as well. I honestly, I kind of like them all. I've worked on Star Wars as well, and one thing I never did was Harry Potter. And I've always kind of liked the idea of doing that, just because that's such an amazing world that Stuart Craig designed. But that would be something that I'd be interested in doing, I think.
They're doing a TV show now, so you never know.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Neil, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for your time as well today. Franchise is streaming now on HBO in America and then going to be in Sky in the UK. Go out and watch Neil's and his team's work. Yeah, thank you again.
Cheers. Thanks very much. See you
Take care.
soon.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.